Hey listeners, the episode you're about to listen to was recorded on January 30th, almost 2 months ago. And things are drastically different in the world today due to COVID-19. We all have people in our lives, if not ourselves, that are at risk of exposure, and the consequences could be really dire. And because of this, I was debating whether to even release these episodes as they have nothing to do with the global pandemic. I just want to be sensitive to what people have going on in their lives right now. But a few friends of mine, much wiser than me, encouraged me to keep publishing these podcasts, as it can be a good resource for lots of people, maybe even more so than ever, to take a step towards thriving instead of just surviving. So I pray that you'll be able to tune out COVID-19 for about the next 45 minutes and take something away from this week's episode to help you see hope in your world. Hey everybody, welcome to Thriving on Mission, and we are here now for our second week for the show, and I'm Matt Rogie, the show's host, and I'm here with producer Quinn Harris.
Hey.
And just thankful for this opportunity to be able to come and record our second session, and I'm super excited again to be here this week. Last week, I just thought the show went really well. It was this introduction to the show and just getting things going and sort of why we're here, and now because we're getting into each episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about some specific things. And again, sort of this overarching topic of thriving on mission. And, and I'll try and pull those out of some of these stories and thoughts that we share here today. So one question though, before we get started, and I don't know how much of a sports guy you are. Maybe we've already talked about this or not, but when we're recording the show, Super Bowl's coming up this Sunday. So 49ers or Chiefs? Do you care?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's funny. I didn't even know who was in the Super Bowl until like 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I'm not a big sports guy.
Yeah.
So
I thought you were going to bring up the Kobe Bryant thing. Actually.
Okay. Yeah. That's a heartbreaker.
Yeah,
that's just a true heartbreaker for that.
For sure.
Yeah. So it's funny. Some of my friends that I served with, the fact that I'm even talking about sports, they're going to be laughing really hard right now because they know I'm not a sports guy, and I think a hat trick is part of baseball, and three points are from football. That's how much I know. But I am from California, though, so I'm going to say 49ers.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens. We'll talk about that. So
while we're on that topic, as a helicopter pilot, did you hear about what they were saying about the fog and all that stuff?
Yeah.
So how I guess big of a deal is that?
Yeah, I mean,
whenever you're flying and being from California, maybe
sure
what that looks like there.
Well, it's funny you say that. I think it was yesterday or the day before, there was somebody who had pieced together the actual audio from air traffic control, and it's all over now. You can find it anywhere, along with the radar flight path, and so I was following along what the guy was doing and where he was going and coming from, and and it sounds like, he was doing everything, again, just from what I heard legally. He got the right clearances to fly through the airspace, and it's things that I've done numerous times as a military helicopter pilot, the special VFR clearance. And even looking at the weather reports, I think if I remember right, there were like 1,000-foot sea lanes, 1.5 mile visibility, which again, in a helicopter isn't too bad because you can slow down. But, and again, it's one of those things, I don't know the experience of the pilot and what he had. And granted, we're in the military, we're taught to push the envelope sometimes, but it's not a blind risk taking. We assess the risk and there's control measures in place, but it's definitely very easy to get in a situation to where you've got no out. And, and it sounds like that's what happened, and of course there's questions and commentary about, the fact that, this guy's flying a celebrity, how much pressure comes from that, either from the celebrity themselves or from, this guy, the pilot worked for somebody else, and so is there pressure from the boss? Again, you just don't know with those things. Was there an instrument failure? it's hard to say. I mean, it's tragic. I mean, I've, to be in those situations. So, and with that too, I'll just toss out there, a lot of people are upset because, and again, it's social media. So you hear everything.
Oh yeah.
And everybody has an opinion and a complaint, and hey, that's, and I get it, but people were, there was a guy who was killed this past week in Afghanistan. And obviously didn't receive the same media and the same,
of course.
And I mean, that's our culture partly too, and, obviously that's heartbreaking as well. Anytime there's a needless loss of life with that.
For sure.
So
for sure.
Yeah. Good question. So as we move into this week, one of the things that, after we wrapped up last week's show, and I shared a little bit about this when I did that interview a couple months ago, was this transition when I went from being in the military for 22 years, and then we went into ministry. And not just any ministry, but we specifically said, hey, we want to be missionaries and we want to go overseas. And with that, we not only said, hey, we want to be missionaries, we want to go overseas, which in a lot of people's minds immediately comes to their minds, this idea of, hey, you're going to go live in a jungle, village, in a hut, this type of thing, with somebody in the jungles of South America or maybe Africa or South Pacific. And that was farthest from what we actually did. And we actually felt that, we wanted to go and live with Muslim people. And at the time, and even now when I tell that story, people just sort of raise their eyebrows and be like, wait, you did what? And especially with my previous life experiences of coming from the military and being, for basically 9 years of my time in service of being involved in combat operations, primarily, all of it was when fighting either against Al-Qaeda or Taliban, maybe, but they're all 100% Islamic. Yeah. And so people are like, wait, even me, for now, it's this hard thing to where, it just doesn't make sense. And I get it, and I'll say that, that's the one cool thing about faith. And specifically, I think, my friends know that I'm a Christian and that I follow Jesus. And that because of that affects the way I see things in the world, and that affects my decisions and my thought process. And, and that affected this thought process too, of why we did this thing. And so I don't say that with any trepidation. I've got lots of friends from the military who either are different religions or are, don't really believe in anything or just believe in a higher power. And that's the really cool thing about the military. We're sort of going down this other track for a second, but I think it's important to say is because again, we see so much strife and conflict with the fact that I don't believe what you believe, or you don't believe what I believe. The fact, well, that doesn't mean that we can't even hang out.
Yep.
And that's the furthest from the truth. A story I'm going to talk about a little bit later here today, really defines what it means. It doesn't matter what religion you are and what you believe. And, I think we can still hang out and have fun and maybe we're not going to be best friends, but we can still have these conversations together. So
yeah, for sure. But
yeah, faith is what led us to this decision. So to sort of set the stage, we started to have probably about 2008. Basically, we started to look at our lives, my wife and I, and what we wanted to do in the future, because we knew that there was going to be a crossroad ahead for us. And it was either going to be retire, or if I got selected for promotion, to take the promotion, and then which would, for the military, that required an obligation to serve a few more years. They give you something, they expect something in return in that respect. And so we started to, what did that look like? And I've been exposed to some mission opportunities through our church, and some of those were overseas, and some of them were also here domestically. Yeah. And what I began to realize that I had these gifts and the skills that, even though I wasn't a pastor, I'd never been to Bible school, really I'd only been going to church since 2003 when I actually became a Christian. So not a long time, but even though I lacked this biblical knowledge, I still had these skills and abilities that could be used for the church and for, furthering Christianity and helping people and loving people. And so we started to look at that. And the first thing that was sort of thrust in our face, well, not thrust in our face, but the first thing that came to us was this idea is I could just do what I was doing in the military, but do it as a missionary pilot.
Yeah.
And we actually started to look at those opportunities a little bit. I mean, there's opportunities out there for people to do that, and they get to go serve overseas as pilots, and they're primarily a support for the actual missionaries who are those guys that are out in the middle of nowhere, and that's the only way they can get supplies and things like that. So we looked at that. There's actually a training center up in Waxhaw, North Carolina that does that just south of Charlotte called JARS. And we went up there on a short-term trip, met these guys, and I was like, wow, man, they're real people, and they're pilots, and they like talking about pilot stuff, and I was like, wait, I like that too. But they're also Christian, and they believe, and so maybe that was it. Because I possessed the flight skills to do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the direction, and mostly that was because of physical problems that I started to develop because of flying, because of an accident I was in with my back. And so I just, really came down to the fact that, physically, and that also led to partly to this decision to get out. But I was just getting to the point to where, while I could still fly, it was doing me more harm than good every time I went ahead and flew, just because of the vibrations and the gear we wore. And I received a lot of great advice from some, both supervisors, mentors, bosses, flight surgeons that were just like, you might really want to consider hanging up your helmet, in some way or another. So that's ultimately what we decided to do. And we decided to retire. Interesting thing with that is I did come out on the promotion list for Chief Warrant Officer 5, which is one of the, is the highest rank a warrant officer can become. And, and again, that was the whole thing of like, all right, do I want this promotion, which would have been a very large increase in money, and also my retirement and things like that. But, I think my wife, I thought about it for about a second. My wife thought about it for a second. And we just said, nope, that's it. Let's go ahead and retire. And so we went ahead and did that. And again, caused people to scratch their heads, as far as, wait, you're turning down promotion. You're not going to go get this great 6-figure job working for, another government agency or a contractor or flying, emergency medical helicopters in the States. You're going to go do this other thing and not make a lot of money, because that's true, So we went ahead and did that. And, we didn't choose where we went. In fact, we were thinking that we were going to go someplace. In fact, my wife and I even had said, because of our previous experience in the military, is we didn't want to go anywhere in the Muslim world. And that was out of fear, 100%. Ignorance, and, so it's really humorous, I guess, if that we firmly believe that God has a sense of humor, and he used it at that point to where, he sort of pulled us into this point and said, hey, I want you to go and live amongst these Muslim people, and not to try to, and I think you'll understand this statement, but, the goal wasn't to go and to save people and to, and to try and change them and change their ways and change their culture, but really it was, just like what we saw in the Bible of what, for people who are familiar with the story of the Apostle Paul, what he did. I mean, he went and he talked about who Jesus was and he talked about who Jesus is, but he was firmly against changing people's cultures, and so that's what we did. My wife, my son and I, and we packed up everything after we retired. Well, actually we didn't pack up everything. We sold most of everything we had and jumped on a plane and went overseas to the island of Cyprus, and specifically in the northern part of Cyprus, which is 100% Muslim, 99% Muslim, really. And, I would say, very secular in nature, a lot like parts of America. They celebrate the major holidays, but it's not as religiously strict as what we see in other countries.
Okay.
And so, we went over there, and it was all just because of our heart change. By the time we left to go overseas, God had really broken our hearts for Muslim people.
Yeah. So that was one of the things before we started that we were kind of talking about. I have a huge heart for Muslim people as well, and it kind of developed out of nowhere. As I'm kind of a part of the truth community, or what normal people would call conspiracy theorists. And so I guess I have a two-part question with this. So you became a Christian in 2003, you said?
Yeah.
So what did that look like, if there was anything after 9/11, and that being one of your motivations to do what you were doing at the time? Is that correct?
I mean, as far
9/11?
Yeah. I mean, as far as doing what I was doing, as far as in the military, or
Yeah. So what did it look like, or was there anything that changed whenever you became a Christian with the work that you were doing with the military?
Yeah. And really, you're talking about the heart level, I think, right? And
was there any kind of type of perspective change or anything on Muslim people, more or less?
I mean, prior to 9/11, I knew very little. I mean, probably about as much as the next person, and about Islam and the Muslim culture. And after 9/11, once they learned who the attackers were and where we're going to be going, obviously there was there was this flow of information about, Islam and sort of their ideologies.
Yeah.
And, and what their thought process was, and the culture and things like that. But really, it was more along the lines of, I remember I received this email from my dad on Tuesday afternoon, 9/11. It was probably about 3:30 in the afternoon. I wish I still had a copy of it, but I do remember what he said. And, it was addressed to my military email address. And all he wrote was, "Godspeed, good hunting." And that was how I felt at the point. We need to go, kill them all.
Yeah.
Because our country's been under attack and people have been killed, and
everybody was like that, to be fair.
Right.
Like I can remember that being, one of probably the most tragic thing that's happened since I've been alive, but also like one of the most, like, that I look back. I mean, it was a very unifying moment for the U.S., but like that mindset today would be a very negative mindset to have. It was, I don't want to say racism, but wherever you would, I mean, it was, kind of, and it was coming from everywhere. Right.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything that could, I mean, it is what it is at that point in time, and I'm fairly certain that, there were Muslim Americans who were killed in the World Trade Center. There were certainly Muslim Americans, I'm sure, that were affected by the loss of life. And, I mean, New York's such a huge melting pot of people, and, there's Muslim Americans serving in the military and, at the time, so, to talk about, this huge shift in people's views of Islam and Muslim. And now, like, if you were like this Muslim American, I mean, people were persecuted. People were, and again, it is what it is. We don't have time to talk about that whole thing, but, but yeah. So, I mean, again, my heart, was sort of just, or this attitude of, all right, they're evil. We need to go kill them because that's what they want to do to us. And not, and I don't think it was necessarily in a vengeful way. I mean, there were probably times to where that feeling was happened. And, if anything, it was a very neutral, but I'd probably be leaning more towards, I mean, they're all bad. I would just lump them all. They're all just as bad as the guys who flew the planes into the building. They're all just as bad as Osama bin Laden, And then, at that point, it was, I think, really where it started to change was education on my part. I had some close friend. He was a pastor at our church. He still is, actually. And they made the decision to go overseas as missionaries and to the same location, to to Muslim people, and they talked about why they did it. And, this idea of, God created everybody. God loves everybody. He doesn't, and it's not just an American God, it's a God of this world. And then he gave me a book to read, and it was through that book of another missionary and just talking about his experiences working and living in Lebanon, that this idea of, oh, wow, really they're no different than my American neighbor who grew up here in the United States for 5 generations. Their family goes back, and, that they want the same things. They want a successful life, whatever that might entail, but maybe that's a job. They want their kids to be healthy. They want their kids to grow up and get good jobs, those types of things. And, sort of this opening of my heart. And that's when I sort of saw, oh, wow, I never knew that they were like us in a lot of ways, and in just like there's extremism in all religions, and even in, a non-religious person can be an extremist, they represent the minority.
Yep.
And so that's what, sort of led us to that decision, this idea of, let's go live in this culture. And I think it was really important to, and this wasn't the driving reason, but, for my son and my wife, because now for 9 years, I've been traveling back and forth over there and, doing my mission at that point. And now I thought, especially for my son, for him to sort of get this world view change, or at least to be able to get a glimpse of what it looked like outside the United States in this bubble that he was living in. Really, it was a Christian bubble.
Yeah.
And so we were able to take him outside of that, and we lived in this great city, and he went to an international school, had friends from all over the world, and, it was hard on him, but, it was hard on all of us moving over there and living over there. And not because people treated us badly or we were in fear for our lives or anything like that. It was a very safe place. It was friendly. It was just hard because you're going into another culture.
Yeah.
And you're leaving everything and it was probably doubly hard for me. I'd done that numerous times. And granted, I didn't necessarily go live in villages in Afghanistan. I didn't. We staged out of big air bases or FOBs, things like that. But for my wife and son, this was a whole new experience. Yeah. And so as a father and as a husband, trying to make sure that they were taken care of and that they were not just surviving, but thriving. That was sort of where we coined this phrase from, because anybody can go live overseas, a missionary, business person, whatever, and you can just survive.
Yeah.
But that's not healthy.
Yeah.
And, to be able to actually thrive takes a mindset, takes, an intentionality to get going, I sort of get this question in numerous ways, but it's this question on the lines of, do we miss it? Would we ever go back? Do we regret the decision we made? Things like that. And, and I think, my wife and I talked about it, do we regret the decision? Not at all. And our son would say the same thing. And, and even though he probably had one of the more difficult times of transition for him as a teenager, but at the same time, and it was hard. I tell people, it was the hardest thing that I'd ever done, even stacking it up against things we did in the military.
Yeah.
And that's part of the biggest reason, is because my family was with me and I had that extra sense of responsibility for them. Would we do it again? We're not planning on it.
Yeah, for sure.
As somebody, with faith and somebody who believes in God and Jesus, obviously that's a decision that, I believe is not up to me. And if he asks, we're going to obey, but it's not something we're actively seeking to go somewhere else, which is why we transition in what we do now, which is sort of helping people figure out if they're called to do something like that. And if they are going to do something like that, how can we best equip them to go?
Yeah. Yeah. So. One of the things that always fascinated me about it is whenever you hear stories about some of the Muslim people that live in that parts of the world that are constantly being attacked by other sects of
Mm-hmm.
Muslims and how strong those people's faith must be for them to stay out there and continue to farm or whatever it is that they're doing. I mean, I know it's a movie, but the man that's depicted in Lone Survivor that harbors the operative.
Yeah.
Like the faith that guy must have, to be, first off, just to be out there with his family for that long was always mind blowing to me, and always just piqued my interest and curiosity in like, what those people are about and what they're doing. And
Yeah. I agree. I mean, you think about, again, what's their faith, what's their mindset, an interesting thing. And again, I'm going to speak in generalities, but in Afghanistan, a lot of them just don't know any different.
Yeah.
Their world is like the area where you're talking about up in the Konar Valley. I mean, it's rural doesn't even describe what it is.
Yeah,
and so these people just have no idea what's out there. I mean, they get some glimpse now, especially now. It's that technology has gotten more pronounced there. The first time I was over there and flying up the Konar Valley in 2002 numerous times, and it was just dark and black. And I remember I came back over in 2004, and there was a little bit more lights, some more power, but there was also like a cell phone tower at every bend in the river.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, we can argue whether that's good or bad, reimposing our American ideologies or whatnot, but just the fact that, these people now are starting to get resources, but still, like for the guy who harbored, who basically took in, it was Marcus Luttrell, and he took him in, he wasn't Taliban or Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah. He was, or Haqqani, he was, just a guy trying to live his life and live by a set of beliefs. That was why he did take in Marcus, is because there was an obligation, within their culture to protect this person who needed help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things to where, regardless of what you believe, that guy has a different set of beliefs that he believes as strongly as the belief systems that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, it is.
And for people like, and it's funny, a month or so ago, my wife and I took an Uber downtown and got into the car, and the driver's name was Muhammad, which, that's a common Muslim name. And I was just curious. I'm just like, hey, where are you from? And he goes, oh, I'm from Afghanistan. I was like, what? You're kidding. I go, where at? And he says, Kandahar. I was like, oh, no way. I've been there numerous times, and just get to chat with him a little bit. And his English was okay, but I wish I would have had more time. I could have just sat down, have a cup of coffee or tea with him, and just seemed like a really nice guy.
Yeah.
Trying to make a life for his family.
Yeah.
So I think I answered that question about regret. Do it again. Again, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
But and again, it's made us who we are now, and allows us to be more equipped now to help other people. Yeah. Whether that's going into missions or just facing life's adversities, because we definitely faced some adversities when we were over there as well. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You had an article that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah. So for some of the listeners, especially those within the military circle, this just came out a couple weeks ago, but it's about the Ranger Battalion here in Savannah, 1st Ranger Battalion, and it was about an operation that happened back last summer. And I actually, I've talked to a couple guys about it. I didn't realize the in-depth, but the Army released this article. So this is something that came from the Army, and now multiple news sites have picked it up, and you can, other websites have picked it up. But it's about these two Ranger medics, primarily, who they're on an operation. This is things that the Rangers do every night over there. They're going out and they're trying to capture, kill bad guys. And, they're doing that every night. Some nights, not a bullet gets fired. And some nights, like this night, there's a lot of bullets flying around the battlefield at that point. And I think, this was a question I was going to try and answer towards the end, but I think it's important, why did this stand out to me? Why did this resonate with me? And why does this resonate so much with, at least with SOF veterans, but I probably with other veterans as well. But I've just seen it pop up in my Facebook newsfeed from other guys that I worked with before.
Yeah.
They're like, man, this is incredible, because it is incredible. It's an incredible story of some young men who probably are no older than, maybe the oldest is 30, if that, but they're probably your age. And they've been trained to do a mission, and they do it very well. And so these guys are out on a mission. They go in, it's nighttime, and they go into this, it sounds like a compound or a village. And, basically they started to take fire. And it was, and the cool thing about Rangers, and boy, I love Rangers. I love Army Rangers. They are, if I could pick one specific group from the military, if I would say, where my heart feels, and it's the Rangers. And this is the reason why. So they started to receive accurate fire, and I'm going to read this from the article. The Ranger Assault Force returned fire in the enemy positions, utilizing their M4 carbines and squad automatic weapons, along with shoulder-fired rockets and grenade projectiles. They attempted to do what few men and women would ever choose to do: close with and destroy the enemy. And to me, that's what when I think of Rangers, that's what I think. These guys that are going to go and whatever it takes, get the mission done, which for the Rangers involves with closing with and destroying the enemy. I didn't get a chance really to work with the Rangers much until went over to Afghanistan the first time, and you begin to learn this creed, because they have a creed and what it means to them, and really it comes down, it's no failure. They're never going to leave a fallen man behind. This idea, and that even if it's, if it starts off with a whole company of Rangers and it gets down just to, if everybody else falls on the battlefield and you're down to the last guy, the lowest ranking private, brand new Ranger, that he's still going to be trying to take that hill or, destroy that bunker or rescue that person. That's just the mentality they have. And, and this story is Medal of Honor worthy. And I wouldn't be surprised to see, at a minimum, Distinguished Service Cross or Silver Stars. But, I really think, so in this battle, some guys started getting injured and the medics start to respond, which again is what this is talking about. And while they're responding to these casualties, they ended up saving 6 lives that night, and they were on the ground for about 2 hours. And again, this is nighttime. So as they began to respond to these casualties and the medics are running, the guys' last names are Bowen and Abel. They're trying to get them out of the line of fire. They're trying to get, protect them and then work on them, because obviously if they're still getting shot up while they're working, that's not going to work. Yeah. So they're doing these things. And he, one of the medics, Bowen, he said, I asked the second casualty if he could hear me, and he responded with, yeah, it really hurts, Doc. And he then cut off the man's body armor to get a visual of his wounds and exposed a gaping hole in the right side of his chest. Now, to me at that point, I would, I'd freeze up, game over. And granted, a lot of this is training. And these guys, and they talk about that in this article, and to Bowen and Abel's credit, they just say, hey, we're doing our job. And I agree. I would say the same thing about what I'm doing, my job. A firefighter going into a burning house to rescue a child. I was just doing my job. Those types of things, But there's something when, even above and beyond that, you look at the skills that guys have. And they began doing some incredible medical procedures on these guys. They're doing needle chest decompressions, which I believe involves taking this large bore needle and putting it in their chest to allow air to inflate so they can breathe. They ended up, it sounds like that they ended up having on somebody else. There was another fight that went on. And again, this is just incredible. The platoon sergeant told Bowen, the medic, there was another casualty. Within a minute of this report, the new casualty came from the woodline, stumbling in Bowen's direction with blood gushing from a wound on the left side of his neck. And as he fell into me with his dog still attached to his belt, I told him to put pressure on the wound. He replied, I'm trying. And so with blood pouring from his neck of the new casualty, Bowen, the medic, placed his finger into the hole in his neck to stop the bleeding. Dude, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, this is Medal of Honor worthy stuff. I mean, and this goes on. These guys are doing, again, just incredible work all in the span of 2 hours. And they ended up inserting or having to do, and that guy who got shot in the neck, doing some type of thing where they put a hole in his neck so he can breathe in the middle of a battlefield at night. They ended up giving them blood transfusions from blood that they carried with them, bags of blood. These casualties were losing so much blood is the Rangers actually have a program to where, I think it's if you're a certain blood type, is it O positive or just O? Basically, you're identified as a blood donor. And so they would call people up and they'd say, hey, we need a blood donor. And some guy would get pulled off the line, go to the medics, and within 10 minutes, he's transferred some blood out of his body into this casualty's body. And now he goes back to the fight. And this is just normal stuff for them, And, when I think about, when I read this story, and what really gets to me, and I think probably the biggest thing that gets to me is these guys are back here in Savannah right now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I mean, they probably, when they left Afghanistan, 24 hours later, they're back here in Savannah, taking their kids to ball games, going down to Kevin Barry's on River Street, or, just normal stuff, going to church, whatever, playing Xbox, in training. And there's just something about that, that I know that there's pain involved with that, having to make that transition back and forth. But again, this idea that, I'm so thankful for guys like this, for Rangers, because, they're doing these things night after night after night. And as I talked about in the first episode, it's a story that needs to be told. Because, it's where we get heroes like this, Bowen and Abel, I mean, this story is just incredible that, and I think as people hear it, they're going to be like, wow, that is incredible. But they, for what they were able to do is just unspeakable. And so I think, now, and I've talked to, I've got a few friends that are Rangers, and I've talked to them a couple of times, just, again, over the past couple months, not necessarily about this, but just, really they've talked to me just about what goes on in their lives. And, and people like this, they also need an opportunity to be able to just talk, because if you keep all that bottled up inside of you, because that's what they're trained to do at the time. And then you have to, right?
Yeah. You don't have a choice.
Right. And, but at some point though, they need to process it and they need to talk about it. And that varies from person to person. That doesn't mean like, hey man, let's go have a cry fest.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
But just, hey, let's just, everything good? How's it going? Things like that. And whether that's, maybe that's ranger to ranger, or soldier to soldier, or, or that's talking with a pastor or whatever, things like that, So I just thought, and again, it's just an incredible story of heroism, of guys that are really just, they're on mission, and that idea of, what it really means. When I think about my life now, as far as thriving on mission, and, and then compare it to this, these guys were well trained. They had a specific purpose. They knew what the tasks that they were going to do. When things happened, they adapted. And even in my day-to-day life now, and again, I function best when I have a purpose, when I have a mission, when I know I have certain tasks to do. And if adversity comes, I'll adapt.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to dwell on the fact that, oh gosh, what if this happens?
Yeah, for sure.
Because if, otherwise you're not going to be able to function, or function at a less than optimal level.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
So cool stuff. I hope to hear more about these guys. Again, I'm sure the fact that, this story came out, the Army published it, I'm sure that they've already been put in for awards, and they all deserve awards. But these guys, and they'll say again, time and time, we were just doing our job, and I agree. But also we need heroes too.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I just thought, I think, some of the listeners, and especially the veterans, will think this is pretty cool. And I'll put a link to the actual article in the show notes.
Yeah.
So
cool. Absolutely.
So let's see. Do we got time for one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
All right, real quick. This past weekend here in Savannah was the Mountain Film Festival on tour. This is a film festival. I guess it's been coming to Savannah for about 11 years now. Mm-hmm. This is the second year that my wife and I have gone, and we actually have made it sort of a small group tradition, that we're like, our small group, our Bible study is primarily, my wife and I are the old people in the group. And so we've got these young 30-somethings, a couple 20-somethings that are in the group, great people. And they're the ones that actually invited to start going to these outdoor adventure film festivals. And we enjoy it. It's fun. And so this past weekend, and we went to this film festival. It was about 2.5 hours. We saw 9 short films, varying in length from about 2 minutes. I think the longest was 30 minutes. And a couple of them were really focused on the outdoors and just this idea of extreme adventure and of helicopter skiing and kayaking down this incredible, rapids, things like that, and that was basically just the focus of extreme sport. But most of them, and the one I want to talk about in particular, was really just about, it was about the outdoors, but it was about thriving, in spite of adversity, and knowing that, hey, I've got something in front of me, and despite of something that, most people would say, oh, that's going to hold me back, or, it's going to take me to the next level. So what I want to do is just, we're going to watch a trailer real quick. It's called The Grand Journey is the name of the movie. It's a 2-minute trailer. And so let's watch that, and then I'll sort of talk about why I thought this was a great example of thriving.
And if for some reason we can't, we run into some trouble getting this thing on the actual video, we'll put links in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Here we go.
I've been looking at the...
So it was an incredible film. It was about 20 minutes long, and you can see that's Kira Burzynski. And her story, again, we saw that there. She was born to where she has no, one of her legs is gone. And so she's got this prosthetic leg, from birth. And so she's had to deal with that, and talking about growing up in Wyoming at the base of the Grand Tetons. And, and so really it's a story, it's about overcoming adversity. It's about, again, doing something that most people would say, oh, you're not gonna be able to do that. Or, oh man, you could really start this self-pity, this doubt of, oh, woe is me, but she conquered it.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story. And I looked at that movie when I saw it that night, and I think a lot of people that I know would resonate with this. You look at that story and you go, I have nothing to complain about.
Yep.
There's absolutely nothing. If she can do that, yeah. What can't I do? What can't I get up this morning and say, yeah, I can do that, and even through the film, and she talks about it, there was times where she talked about when the weather got bad, that there was, this feeling of uncertainty, or maybe even some fear, as you're in that position, but she still pushed through it, and she had some people behind her, helping her, pushing her through it as well. And, it's funny because where she was at, the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, last summer, I was up in Montana, the Beartooth Mountains, which is not the same location, but general vicinity in the United States area. And I was on a veteran backpacking camping trip with an organization called the Tadpole Foundation. And boy, that thing kicked my butt physically.
Yeah.
It was just, I'm 50 years old. I've definitely gained a little bit of weight since I got out of the military. I was a pilot beforehand, so I wasn't this Arnold Schwarzenegger physical specimen, type of guy. More stereotypical of what people might say a warrant officer pilot might look like, or physically. But that had even dropped from there a little bit, and that thing just kicked my butt. And then I watched this film, and I'm seeing her do it with one leg.
Yeah.
And apparently, if you saw her walk a little bit, or if you watch the whole film, she actually has to lock her leg out. And so it's just not this comfortable thing. And she's doing it with a pack. And again, I've got no excuse is what I think, you know,
Yeah, for sure.
for whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't compare ourselves with each other either, you know,
Yeah,
because we all have different life experiences. But we can also use stories like hers and stories like yours, Quinn, and people can use my story as well, though, to encourage them to sort of take that next step towards something a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So great story. If it's not out completely, it's about a 20-minute video. They're still doing showings across the United States, but I encourage people to check it out and check out her story as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I have for this week. You know, talking a little bit about, we really jumped around from, you know, Christian missions to Rangers, you know, doing incredible things to the story of mountain climbing and overcoming diversity. You know. So thanks for having me again, Quinn.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, City Church for hosting, and, you know, look forward to next week's episode.
Yeah.
All right.
See y'all then.
We'll see you.